forest. We had one torch per group, so a lot of us used the torches on our phones to see where we were going. We walked around the same route as we had in the day, and I was vigilant in checking my phone and its battery because I was terrified of getting lost in the dark in this rainforest. We were just over halfway, I would say, with the loop around the site, and I was sitting comfortably at around 80% battery as I had the foresight of fully charging before heading out. But then, nothing. The last thing I remembered was admiring the reflection of the eyes of the crocodiles, intently keeping watch over our group. Then, when I came back to, I was on the other side of one of the villages that we had seen earlier in the day, alone. My phone was now at 1% battery. I was completely separated from my group, and I remember just staring out into this old abandoned hut with the dim light of my phone. Well, I immediately started to panic before I heard the laughter from another group on the opposite side of this small village about 50 feet away, so I rushed over and formed up with them. When I eventually reconnected with my group, they were worried and said that I was walking along, not saying anything, and then when we reached the village, they just lost sight of me. Now, I've tried to be as rational as I can thinking about this experience. I mean, I was tired, getting used to a new climate and arguably not as hydrated as I should have been, which could obviously play several large roles. However, it is important to note that I have a pretty good memory, as that's how I've learned to study, and to completely forget what would have been a 40-minute walk is just really unlike me. Thinking back on the event, I still get chills, and the more I try to rationalize it, the more I feel like something unexplainable happened that night. My only comfort really is that, apart from the fear of being abandoned in the rainforest at night, I never felt threatened or in danger or anything. At least, that's what I think. So, mimics. Well, I think that's the right word for what it is. But I've also seen people call similar experiences doppelgangers, so maybe that's the right term. In any case, my grandma's house has had some really weird going on since before I was born. The mysterious ringing phones in the basement, TVs and VCRs with minds of their own, bassinets that rocked by themselves. You name it, it's pretty much happened there. Anyway, it seems that one of them may be a mimic. So my grandfather had a job that would take him out of town at times. On at least 2 separate occasions while he was gone, my grandma and uncle saw him walk down a hallway and out of sight. They thought that maybe he could have come home without them noticing, but his car wasn't in the driveway either time, and he came home later and insisted that he hadn't been home. My mother also claimed that she used to talk to her deceased grandmother at night sometimes, and it scared her because she knew that logically it just wasn't right, but it was her grandmother, so she felt safer about it. Knowing about mimics now, it probably wasn't her grandmother though, and that's pretty terrifying. So, now to my own personal experience. So my sister and I used to spend weekends at my grandmother's house when we were younger, through high school even. We all slept in her bed, and my grandma would make us bacon and hot cocoa for breakfast in the mornings. It was a really nice time. But I woke up one morning, I was still in a state of sort of half-awareness. I opened my eyes and I saw my grandmother leaning in her bedroom doorway, just looking at me. I figured that she must have just come up to see if I was awake yet. But then she leaned backwards out of the doorway and out of sight. And something about the way that she moved just wasn't quite right. That's when I also realized that I smelled and heard bacon cooking downstairs. And it struck me as really odd that she would walk away from the bacon while it was on the stove still. She was in her 70s at this time, and though she got around well for her age, taking the stairs was still a bit of a task and took some time for her. It didn't make any sense that she would risk burning food on the stove just to come upstairs and look at me. I mean, she could have just yelled up at me to see if I was up. Anyway, I called out to her to ask if she was upstairs, From where I was, I could see out the bedroom door and down the stairs, and she walked from the kitchen to the bottom of the stairs and said no, she was making bacon. I sort of freaked a little bit, got out of bed, and I just booked it downstairs. My sister was already awake and downstairs with my grandma, which is why she was already making bacon before I was up. And both of them said that she hadn't been upstairs, so I told them what happened. That's when my grandma told us the stories that I told above about seeing my grandpa when he couldn't have been there and stuff like that. So yeah, I've been a little bit scared of my grandma's house ever since then, and I really don't like staying. So just before Christmas, my girlfriend and I had gone to visit her mother. Her name is Jill, and she had recently separated from someone who we all pretty much perceived as extremely negative and toxic. Nobody was sad to see him leave. Shortly after we arrived, I went upstairs in the home to use the washroom, when all of a sudden I had this overwhelming sense of fear, and all the hairs on my whole body just stood up. It really creeped me out, and as a 33-year-old man, I kept telling myself that I was just acting crazy. But it was like I could feel eyes on me from all of the bedrooms just staring. Well, not long after that, I started feeling very nauseated and developed a really bad headache. And then I also started hearing footsteps upstairs, and I was really starting to question my sanity. But obviously I kept all of this to myself. My girlfriend eventually started complaining of a headache and nausea as well, and it was at that point that I knew something was wrong. But I wasn't about to ruin the evening by suggesting that something paranormal was going on in the house. To be honest too, my first inclination was actually carbon monoxide. But Jill was absolutely fine, and I could also see that the devices were functioning properly. Well, we left Jill's and proceeded on our way home when I told my girlfriend that I was feeling ill inside that home, and then she told me that she was hearing some really strange noises coming from upstairs. I was trying to stay as calm as possible given the situation, and I didn't want to upset my girlfriend. Jill had been involved in a series of unexplained accidents leading up to this night though, which included little things like tripping over things frequently to big things like falling off of a ladder outside. But the strange thing is that she claims that she didn't fall and that, instead, the ladder just kicked out from underneath her. We brought this to Jill's attention the following day, where she advised us that she had no idea but was very freaked out and proceeded to smudge the house. The girlfriend went back a few days later and claims that she was still very freaked out and unsettled in the home. A few days later, a friend of Jill's walked her through various methods of cleansing the home. I haven't been back since, but the girlfriend has been and says that it doesn't feel as unsettling as before, but is still a little bit unsure. But I don't know. Do any of you guys have a similar experience, or perhaps know what this could be? I'm getting pretty worked up even just talking about it. It was a very unsettling night, and I would like to try and find a solution to whatever this is. So my family is from rural Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. Some people live in town and others live by cornfields. The town was always quirky but spooky, and there were tons of stories like a Native American guy killed a man and stuffed him in a tree log. A witch cursed the town because they didn't accept her. There was a Mormon home outside of town that housed the founder for a few months. It was rumored someone tarred one of his followers and left him to die or something, but anyways, when I was 8, we moved into town from the country. I didn't feel anything at first, but I always got bad feelings and would run past the front room of the house. Lights would flicker, things would go missing, and well, my mum is very in tune to her surroundings and definitely has a gift to see things that are not there. In my family, they began seeing a little boy and a girl that would run around and play dressed in like 19th century clothes. But they would wave to people and run up and down the stairs. There was a man who smoked cigars and a lady in red. The little boy once came to my mum and pointed behind her TV to let her know that my brother's epilepsy medicine was behind it. I also want to note too that we lived behind an old 19th century cemetery that was, well, really creepy. So, our family went through some hard times living there. A lot of fights between my parents, but my brother was busy partying, which made things worse. And I eventually developed a really big drug problem. Mental health was a serious issue in our home, and I'm not saying it's the ghost's fault, but it was odd. Anyway, we moved out after 10 years of living in that home, and that was 10 years ago now, and I still have creepy dreams about living in that house. People coming and going, and just awful things happening there. Does anyone else have dreams of a childhood home that housed some really spooky, otherworldly things? I feel like a part of me is stuck there, but I don't know how to explain it. I really hope that someone can give me some insight though, because, well, that would be really helpful. This happened like 3 or 4 years ago, but I still remember all the details because it freaked me out so bad. So me and my brother, we had decided to sleep on our mattresses in our back lounge room. Basically a sleepover, but with a sibling. However, when we actually went to go to sleep, he changed his mind and went back to his room. Now, keep in mind, he was like 9 and wasn't really used to it. But I chose to stay instead of going back. But I ended up not being able to sleep very well. At the time, the washing had recently been done, so there was a bunch of like baskets sitting out there. For context, our back lounge room directly connects to our dining room, basically one huge room split into two. The baskets were in the dining room section, aka directly behind my head. So I turned my head back around to look at the baskets, just sort of bored out of my mind. And when I did, I saw this black shadow crawl on all fours from behind one of the baskets to another. I instantly got up and looked around the room, but when I did, there was nothing there. It was like 1 or 2 in the morning when this happened, so nobody else was awake, but I was scared out of my mind, and I didn't go back to sleep until it was like 5 in the morning. I still have no idea what that thing was, but I was too scared to check if something was actually there, so I really don't have a way to confirm what it was, or if it was just a trick of my eyes, but man, it looks so real. I don't know why, but I recently started thinking about an event that happened roughly around 2013 to 2014 when I was about 14 years old. Now, I've never experienced hallucinations in my life, and my family hasn't either. Back then, the Slender Man hype was at its peak, and of course I wanted to reenact the game with my brother. So I drew some figures, similar to the game, on some A4 paper sheets and went into the woods next to my residence. It was midday and my brother, 2 years younger than me, was fiddling with some sticks at the entrance of the woods. Meanwhile, I was nailing the sheets of paper to some trees. Even though it was sunny, I felt like this place had a weird vibe to it this day though. So, dumb me continued nailing the papers to the trees, thinking that the atmosphere would make the game even better. About 15 to 20 minutes after I started nailing the papers, I came upon an old fallen tree with its roots sticking out of the ground. As I passed it, I felt something strange going on. It wasn't a sound, just a feeling that I had to turn around. As I did exactly that, I saw an approximately 2.5 meter tall figure, all black, except its face, standing about maybe 4 or 5 meters away from me. It had no facial features and just stood there, watching me. The whole encounter lasted about 2 seconds before I just turned around, screamed at the top of my lungs, and bolted towards my brother's location. I was in total panic mode, running like my life depended upon it. I felt relieved when I finally saw my brother fiddling with some rocks on the side of the road. I tried explaining what happened to him, but he just thought that I was messing with him. Well, the game was cancelled, and I made sure to stay by his side while taking off all of the pictures that I nailed to the trees. I went back to the spot of the encounter with him, examined it clearly, trying to tell myself that I must have just seen an illusion or something. But nothing even remotely resembled that figure, or was even that black in that area. I kept this encounter mostly to myself and never really talked about it anywhere, thinking that everyone would just write it off as me being crazy or something. My family are all heavily religious people, unlike me, who was an atheist too. But the whole thing happened in France, in the 92nd Department.
Fact.
To this day,
When
I
you
still
hired-
have no explanation to what I saw. Maybe it was just Slender Man in my head. Maybe it was something else, though. I didn't get a clear look at it since all of my instincts were telling me to just run, but I'm pretty sure that this thing really was there. So before I tell this story, I really feel like I should start off with a bit of background info. So I'm 22 years old. My dad is an essential worker who works around patients with COVID-19, and as a family, we had decided that it would be best that he not return home for the time being, because my mum had recently gotten her hernia removed, which had made her immune system pretty weak, so we didn't want to put her in any harm's way. My mum is bedridden too, so she doesn't move around much. So one day, I had stayed up until around 3 a.m. watching Prison Break, and at this point, I'm pretty tired. This whole coronavirus quarantine thing got my schedule all types of messed up, so I decided that it would be best if I just sleep right away, so I can try to wake up a bit earlier tomorrow morning. I put my phone on charge, I drank a bit of water, and then I lay down. I fell asleep pretty much instantly, too. I wake up and I try to move my arms, but I'm not able to. I can sort of look around, but it doesn't feel like my eyes are moving. It's kind of like when you see something through your peripheral vision. And then I see the black figure to my left, which I've come to befriend from my 2 or 3 times seeing him and having sleep paralysis like this. I then close my eyes and exert all the energy that I can into moving, and I wake up sweating bullets. It was around 4 in the morning, so I decided that I would just continue to watch a movie or something, so I didn't get much sleep that night. Fast forward to Wednesday night, my mum and I decided to watch an old Indian movie, so I went to lay down on my dad's side of the bed and we started to watch the movie. An hour in, I hear the beep of the safe
This is
in my
section
room.
1 of...
The beep is pretty loud, so anybody could easily hear it. Nobody besides my mum and me were home, and even if somebody was able to break in, there was no way that they were able to make it into my room like that. I mean, you would have to go through the living room towards the hallway and go up the stairs to get into my room, so I would have easily seen someone walk past my parents' room, or at least heard them. So I started to panic because my dad's Glock 19 was in there and had some ammo tucked away to the side as well. It was an old-fashioned lock, so it wasn't hackable or anything like that. The only people that knew the code were my dad, my mum and I, but a second later we hear something drop to the floor. I run to close the room door and open up the lock that was in my parents' room, which had a couple of guns inside. I load up and I get to the move, carefully making my way into my room, trying not to make any noise. My finger was on the trigger the whole time and my heart was pounding. Time also felt like it just had stopped. Normally it would take less than a minute to get to my room, but it took me at least 3 this time. I looked through every room before I got to mine, and as soon as I approached, I heard footsteps inside. I point the gun up and slowly move towards the door so I can see inside. I take a couple of peeks and I don't see anything. Oh, I rush inside and I look around and there's nobody. I instantly stand towards the corner so I would be able to see everywhere, so no one's able to run up on me. And after about a minute or so, I look around and see that my dad's gun was indeed on the floor, and the bullets were scattered everywhere. I had some money in the safe, but all of it was still in there. But at this, my mum immediately calls the police. But if there was someone in my room, there's just no way that they could get out without using the door. And there were no vents in my room, no windows, nothing. A little bit creeped out now, I go to my mum's room and she has this scared look on her face. I ask her what's wrong and she tells me the scariest thing that I've ever heard in my life. She goes on to tell me that while I was gone, she saw me come into the room and stand towards the middle of it with an evil smile. She stares right up at me, then she hears the footsteps and hears me shouting that I was going to be right there. She wipes her tears from her face and then I enter the room and continue to ask her what's wrong. It is the next day now and my mum and I still don't know what the heck happened and we're both still terrified. My mum and I told the police everything when they arrived, and they looked around and told us that there were no signs of a break-in of any sort. Strangely though, the lock of my room is a little bit wonky. For some reason it just refuses to close now. We decided to call my uncle and his son to come live with us because we were scared. They live only 2 houses down, so it wasn't too much of a hassle for them. But if any of you guys have any explanation for what happened, I know I'm all ears because we have no idea. So my name is Rick Martinez and I'm a retired truck driver. This happened when I was like 30 years old and I'm now 62. So on the road I see many strange things. I've told this story many times as well. A lot of people don't believe me, but it starts off in Stockton, CA, where I picked up a load of pipe. My destination was Salt Lake City in Utah. I was supposed to refuel in Barstow, CA at a truck stop, but lo and behold, they were out of fuel. So I told my supervisor, hey, I got like half a tank of fuel, and he told me to continue and hit the first truck stop when I saw it. So 100 miles into Nevada, nothing but desert, I didn't see anything but sparsely lit desert with a couple of towns. When I noticed my gauge set was actually reading empty, and I'm thinking, well, that's not right. So I took the first exit that I saw and I pulled over. I told my supervisor, who was right behind me an hour away, that I was afraid to continue on and run the tank dry. So he told me to sit still and he would be by in an hour and we could siphon some of the fuel from his tanks into mine. So I just sort of sat there and I noticed that it was a small town with pretty sparse lighting. As I sat there, I couldn't run the engine, so I couldn't really listen to the radio, so I just ended up sitting there in silence. I don't do drugs or anything, and I didn't make this up, but this is what happened. So as I'm sitting there, I notice a lot of undone construction, a trailer park to my right, completely dark, and a church off to my left, about a block away, with its lights on. It's about 2 in the morning now, and I see this jackrabbit hopping around my truck. It hops around and just sort of stares at me and keeps hopping around. So I'm getting hungry, and I notice what looks to be a convenience store another block away from the church. I get out of the truck, and I decide to walk to the store. But while I'm walking, I keep hearing this dog howling like it's in pain. As I'm passing the church, the 2 doors are wide open, and I hear clapping like they're having a service or something. As I pass the church, I look inside, and there's no one except for this skinny white old man reading from the Bible and talking about hell or something. I don't linger too long, though, and I pass the church. Then I heard clapping again. About then, the dog starts howling again. I notice that there's a bunch of empty houses on this street that goes up a hill. I'm still making my way towards what I think is a little mini-mart or something. All the time the dog keeps howling, all the lights are on, and as I go inside, this little old lady with glasses is reading a book. There's hardly anything in this store, maybe a few cans of food, a couple of bags of chips, water in the refrigerators, but that's about it. And strangely, the whole time the lady didn't even pick her head up from her book. So I grab some water and some chips. I'm pretty hungry at this stage. There's basically nothing to eat in my truck. So I asked the old lady, is this all you have, and where is everybody at? She told me that everybody moved out, and new construction was supposed to begin like 6 months ago, but hadn't. She didn't say anything after that, so...
are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit the path by which I can come down and speak to you. He looked up at me without replying. and I looked down at him without pressing him too soon with the repetition of my idle question. Just then, there came a vague vibration in the earth and air, quickly changing into a violent pulsation and an oncoming rush that caused me to start back, as though it had force to draw me down. When such vapour as rose to my height from this rapid train had passed me, and was skimming over the landscape, I looked down again, and saw him refurling the flag he had shown while the train went by. I repeated my inquiry. After a pause, during which he seemed to regard me with fixed attention, he motioned with his rolled-up flag towards a point on my level, some 200 or 300 yards distant. I called down to him, "All right?" and made for that point. There, by dint of looking closely about me, I found a rough zigzag descending path notched out, which I followed. The cutting was extremely deep and unusually precipitate. It was made through a clammy stone that became oozier and wetter as I went down. For these reasons I found the only way long enough to give me time to recall a singular air of reluctance or compulsion with which he had pointed out the path. When I came down low enough upon the zigzag descent to see him again, I saw that he was standing between the rails on the way by which the train had lately passed, in an attitude as if he were waiting for me to appear. He had his left hand at his chin, and that left elbow rested on his right hand, crossed over his breast. His attitude was one of such expectation and watchfulness that I stopped a moment, wondering at it. I resumed my downward way, and stepping out upon the level of the railroad and drawing nearer to him, saw that he was a dark, sallow man, with a dark beard and rather heavy eyebrows. His post was in as solitary and dismal a place as ever I saw. On either side, a dripping wet wall of jagged stone excluded all views but a strip of sky. The perspective, one way, only a crooked prolongation of this great dungeon. The shorter perspective in the other direction, terminating in a gloomy red light, and the gloomier entrance to a black tunnel, in whose massive architecture there was a barbarous, depressing, and forbidding air. So little sunlight ever found its way to this spot that it had an earthy, deadly smell, and so much cold wind rushed through it that it struck chill to me, as if
We'll tell you about it during the next half hour as we take you behind the scenes on a modern audio theater production and investigate the making of Hector Mike Kelleher, now an aspiring filmmaker living in New York City.
It started out as a small project that rolled into a much larger project.
Co-author Matt Barco, who is a computer programmer for the philosophy department at IU.
Well, I usually describe it as sort of a supernatural horror, murder mystery, psychological thriller type of radio show.
And co-author Dave Johnson, now a marine archaeologist living in Florida.
I like to think of Hayward as one of those 1960s horror comic books.
The old Hayward Mansion is located somewhere along the seacoast of Maine, but our story really starts in the Midwest, here in Bloomington, Indiana. In 1992, hoping to start a local radio theater troupe, I met with some folks over on the Indiana University campus.
We were all members of this troupe of improv comedians, and this guy named Richard Fish came to see us play one night and said, "We're starting up a community radio station, and we were wondering if y'all would be interested in taping some of your improv and putting it on the radio and see what would work." So we all went out to his studio, and we were doing the improv stuff, and this gentleman, Matt Bacco, and I sat down and said, it'd be neat if we could all get together and do something that was kind of a little different than comedy, and we were both interested in doing a horror show. We then adjourned to a local tavern and started drinking, and